Irène.
Just a couple of words, just to say how honored we are to have Irène Rosier Catach introduce the first formal lecture of the Roger Bacon Research Society. Her work on Roger Bacon is very well known, and I don't need to repeat much. Director of Research at CNRS, charge de conférence at l'École pratique des hautes études, spécialiste de l'histoire, théorie, linguistique au Moyen Âge, the author of at least 4 books, the famous La Grammatica Speculative des Modistes in 1983, La Parole comme Acte 1994, La Parole Efficace, Scène, Rituel, Sacré, and more recently the edited volume, Le Pouvoir des Mots. So we are very honored to have Irène Rosier Catach present this very, very complex topic of Roger Bacon's contributions to language. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. So can I start? So you have a handout and you're going to need it because it's a bit complex, the relationship of the various works of on language by Roger Bacon. And I tried to make a big chart, which may not be completely complete, but I think it shows what I want to say today. What I want to really to show is the diversity and convergence of Roger Bacon's various views on language. Working on the introduction for the translation of the De Signis, which is nearly completed. We've been working on it for a number of years with Alain de Libera and Laurent Cesali and Frédéric Goubier. I read a lot about Bacon's biography, and I saw that there were still some misunderstanding or divergences between the authors. Now, I think we can gather some data on biography by looking at the works themselves, as people have already done. So I want to follow this link. The various contexts to which his writings belong, the contemporaries he's mentioning or criticizing, the doctrinal questions he confronts, an important indication of his place in the intellectual setting of the 13th century. One of the problems raised by the biographies is a very general one and concerned the relationship between Paris and Oxford. As a matter of fact, we just wrote with Alain de Libera, and he was supposed to be with me here, but I don't know. He's lost in the clouds, I don't know where. But anyway, on the handout, you have number 1 on the handout, the name of a paper we did, which is called the Paris-Oxford Split Revisited, which follows an old paper of his, which is the Oxford and Paris tradition in logic. You have that on the handout under number 1. So we talk about that at the end. Now, Bacon, as is well known, devoted so much space in his writings to the linguarum cognitio that it is not possible to go through every subject in detail. But I would like to insist on the diversity of his interests. One interesting and I hope convincing way to show this is to see the reorganization and evolution of the initial section devoted to language in the Opus Maius 3, when compared with the other works of the late 60s, and in particular the summary of the Opus Tertium, chapter 25-27. The different dimensions of his chapters on language cannot be separated. In particular, his views on language, etymologies, translation, his reflections on the power of words, on science and persuasion, as I will show. Knowledge of language is important, as is well known for knowledge in general, both divine and secular, but it also has a practical dimension in the service of the church, in particular its task of persuasion. And in passing, I want to insist on new studies on language, which should be included in, especially in the work on the Compendium Studi Philosophiae. And I'm very sorry that being written in French, they haven't been. So on the handout, you will see mostly French bibliography, but the rest, of course, is just as important. I will devote just a little time at the end on the more technical aspects of Bacon's work. of the early treatises on grammar and logic, the later De Signis and the Compendium Studii Theologiae, in the context precisely of the Oxford-Paris split. The performative or pragmatic dimension of language developed in these treatises cannot either be separated from the rest of Bacon's production of the Linguarum Cognitio. So if you can follow what I'm going to say on the big chart which I gave you, it's the last part of the handout. It's going to be easier. So the third part of the Opus Maius has as its object language or grammatical usage in the three languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. He gives in the Opus Tertium, chapter 25-27, what he calls a summary of the Opus Maius 3. It contains three sections, which you have on the left column of the handout. The first section is dedicated to the knowledge of languages so that it is useful for the science, both secular and divine. In his other works, such as the Grammatica Graeca, Hebrae, or Compendium Studii Philosophiae, one finds very similar remarks, more than remarks, developments on Greek, Hebrew, etymologies, and so on. The science of wisdom languages is a primary science, ignorance of which constitutes a factor in feeding knowledge in general. This science is placed alongside to the science of mathematics, perspective, alchemy, and the experimental science. So this discipline has, first of all, its goal, the knowledge of wisdom, propter studium sapientiae. And the reasons in favor of this apprenticeship, 8 in all, are enumerated in the first section of the Opus Maius 3, taken again in the summary of the Opus Tertium, a different order, and has another list in the Compendium Studii Philosophiae, where we find 13th reason. So I just enumerate them briefly. And this is maybe the most well-known part of his analysis of language. So he says, first, knowledge of language is a requirement both in the religious domain and the philosophical domain, because all the wisdom of the Latins, Bacon says, has its origin in books written in a foreign language. For that reason, it is necessary to know the languages in which this wisdom was originally written down. And he says the Latin didn't write any original text, either in theology or in philosophy. Second reason, to understand the original text, which cannot be adequately translated because of the poverty of the Latin language. 3, to know exactly what the translated texts talk about, and this is a question of also knowing the sciences which these texts treat of. 4, to be able to read the texts, religious or philosophical, which have not been translated. 5, to show oneself as a worthy son and successor of the ancient thinkers, whether those of antiquity itself or antiqui of the present century, such as Robert Grosstedt, Hermann the translator, and so on. 6, to be able to correct the mistakes which are already present in the books of theology or philosophy. 7, to understand the meaning and the correct interpretation of the words, both in theology and philosophy. 8, because Latin and Greek grammar, because most of Latin grammar and Latin language itself come from Greek and Hebrew. Here we find a lot in Compendium Studii Philosophiae on etymologies, variation in spelling, errors on the pronunciation of the Greek. So what is important here, and I don't want to go into too many details for that first part, is that we find a lot of this in the Compendium Studii Philosophiae, chapter 6-12, and it only covers this section as a matter of fact, and not the rest of what was originally in Opus Maius 3. After giving the 13 causes to prove the necessity of the Scientia Linguarum Sapientialium, the last part deals with Greek in details, as will be done in the Greek grammars. And as noted by its recent editor, Thomas Maloney, the Compendium Studii Philosophiae shows a wider knowledge in Greek and Hebrew, indicating that Bacon probably devoted again more time in this period to the study of languages. But now I want to add two things. First, there has been some interesting research on the knowledge of Hebrew in the medieval period, and especially in England, by Gilbert Dahan and Judy Oslovy-Schlanger. You have that in the bibliography under number 2. Under what has been repeated even recently, there existed some knowledge of Hebrew, lexica, Hebrew alphabets, a few treatises on Hebrew pronunciation. So this, I'm just mentioning this, but you will find more in these studies, which are really important. And Benoît Grévin also, you've got that mentioned under number 2 in the handout. Third, under number 3, I'm going to talk about another very important study, which has been completely neglected in the recent editions, that by Étienne Anahem, Benoît Grévin, and Martin Morard, Exégèse judéo-chrétienne, magie et linguistique, un recueil de notes inédites attribuées à Roger Bacon. This recueil was already known from Samuel Berger's thesis in 1893. It's a dossier which is preserved in the manuscript 402 of the Bibliothèque Municipale de Toulouse, which is followed by the Correctorium Bibliae of William of Marat. It is composed of 3 parts: a lexicon with linguistic remarks and etymologies related to the Hebrew and Greek words of the Bible and of the Glossa Ordinaria, introduced by the linguistic description of Hebrew and Greek alphabet, borrowing from the Brito Metricus, and which has inspired the Liber Trigrossos of Gérard de Huy. Second part of this notes, a correspondence between scholars, correspondence including etymologies, explanation, according to the Vulgate. 3 questions, and these are similar problems, but organized in questions and answers. 2 other manuscripts have been discovered, which are on the handout, and these notes are answers that a group of clergymen asked to one scholar on various problems related to the study of the Bible. And the presence of the French articles li and les in this work is interesting because it's always a French influence, although the articles were also used in England. So the authors of this study claim the unity of the 3 parts and that it originates with one same author, and that the dossier has been reorganized in order to be edited. And they showed with detailed and very convincing arguments that the author of the notes is indeed Roger Bacon, in view of the numerous parallels with the other works, which Berger already had some of them, but here they have more. And in particular, the parallels with the Compendium Studi Philosophiae, and even more with the 2 Greek grammars and the Hebrew grammar. So this is very important because it's really a new text. I mean, it's something important which has been missed. So they also claim that the compiler of the notes may be William of Marat, and it has been written sometimes between 1257, that is Bacon's entrance in the Franciscan order, and 1263, because there is the mention of a project of writing a compute, which is being written by Bacon after 1263-65. So these notes, and I really sum up a very long study, which would mention a whole expose. So these notes seem to correspond to the research made by Bacon in the years preceding his Opus Maius. And it's interesting because it's a gap in the biographies where we don't know exactly what Bacon did. And in fact, this is probably what he did. He was working with other scholars, and he was within a group of Franciscan clergymen. And what is really fascinating in these notes is there is what the author calls a contamination with Bacon's other works on grammar and semantics. For instance, we find here the well-known example of figurative construction, Turbafuerunt, in general it's Turbarunt, the example, which is analyzed in the Summa Grammatica, and the example is said to be frequent in Hebrew. So this is, there are other marks which really allow for authorship of Bacon, especially some very nasty remarks against other people, and this is very Baconian. So this, I just want to mention this, but this is, I think it's an important novelty. Now we go to section 2. So the second section has as its aim the knowledge of languages insofar as it can be useful in the Church of God and the republics of the faithful, the conversion of the infidels. But here, interestingly, the summary of the Opus Tertium, chapter 26, does not coincide exactly with the treatment in the Opus Maius. And this suggests that Bacon decided to add or reorganize the initial material, and this is very relevant. The addition is very explicit at the very beginning of chapter 26. He says, I think I've put the text, let me see. Yes, under number 4. De inde comparo linguarum utilitatem ad ecclesiam Dei, etc. Et propter alias secretoria de cursus totus ecclesiae secundum. I will go on the detail of that. So he explicitly says that he's been doing something else. So in the first place, and you have that in the handout under 2.1, you have four tasks for the divine officers, for the collation of the sacraments, to be able to preach to other people in their mother tongue, and what he says rather cryptically, it is for the whole of the church from its beginning till the end of the days, and invokes a certain liber disseminibus scripturarum, like was mentioned in the Opus Tertium. Well, I leave that. I may come back to that in the discussion if you want, but for the interest of time. Anyway, this is an important tract because there is a kind of association there between the apocalypse, the struggle against the infidel and the antichrist, and the reform of knowledge. And this most certainly constituted for Bacon an important source of inspiration. Now, the section 2.2, which you have on, if you look at the chart, the section 2.2, which is not in the summary of the Opus Tertium, are again practical justifications concerning the relation of the church with other people in which the knowledge of languages is required, the demands of trade and the fraud which result from having recourse to the interpreters. 2, disputes that missionary brothers can run into with the judiciary of these foreign countries. And 3, the negotiation of peace treaties. It's interesting because it's really practical, thinking about the probably the people who went into this foreign country to convert the infidels, as he says. Now, the 2.3 is interesting. The section 2.3 is, he says, the usefulness of the knowledge of languages for the conversion of infidels, the whole world over. So it is on persuasion. And there is a very brief mention in Opus Tertium to Aristotle's Rhetoric and Poetics and Al-Farabi de Sciences. He says that in manibus Latino, in the hand of Latin people, is the power to convert other people. The Jews, the Saracens, the pagans, the schismatic would easily be persuaded of our faith, Bacon says, if the preachers could present it in their foreign language rather than having recourse to violence and war. Interestingly, this section on persuasio, which is mentioned in Opus Maius 3, is analyzed more fully in another part of the Opus Maius, That is the seventh part, the part on Philosophia Moralis, which deals with the practical benefits of knowledge of the science. It is hardly mentioned in the summary of the Opus Tertium 26, but you have it in Opus Tertium chapter 25 with an explicit reference to it. So these radices persuasionis, the roots of persuasion, are useful, Bacon says, to know how to preach towards believers just as disbelievers, laïcs or clerics. The mention of Aristotle's rhetoric and poetics is very interesting, and you also find it in another section, which is on the section where he deals with the usefulness of mathematics and the distinction between logic and rhetoric. And there I refer to Jeremiah Hackett in his volume Commemorative Aces, which explains very well all this part from rhetoric. So you can see how it is it's part of the Opus Maius 3 of the original section on language, but in the same time, it's transferred in another section in the Philosophia Moralis, because there is here the link between language and ethics, which is very important. What I want to show in all this is the reorganization of the material, which I think is really meaningful. Now, we have that also with the next section from 2.4. Still working from the premise of the pacific conversion of the infidel on the path of wisdom, Bacon invokes the power of letters, and we have already mentioned that with the De Similibus Scripturarum, but he also mentioned the power of words. In Opus Maius 3, we only have 1 or 2 pages on that, but he explicitly postponed the treatment of the matter for later, and we find it elsewhere, that is in the section on astrology. So what is interesting here is that in the summary of the Opus, as you can see on the handout, in the summary of the Opus Tertium, this thing about the power of words occupies nearly almost the whole chapter 26. So here there is a major reorganization, because it was in the section on astrology, and for various reasons I will discuss, it has been reintegrated, maybe not reintegrated, but moved at least in the general 3 chapters on language. And this is also interesting to see. So we have this in the section on astrology. So we can suppose that Bacon chose to treat this question of the power of words first in the chapters on astrology, and that secondarily he wished to bring together with everything which is connected with language, integrating in this way in the second section his reflection on the power of words. And we find it, as you have in the same and at the right of the chart, you find it also in the Epistola de Secretis Operibus Artis Naturae, and in the Tractatus Brevis on the Secretorum. Now, on this, there's a lot to say, but I will restrict to 2 remarks, a little more than remarks, but 2 topics. For Bacon, the efficacy of the spoken word is thought in the manner of a physical process. The word, in fact, insofar it is made up of different elements which confer on its value, acts on the listener by way of a multiplicatio speciarum, analogous to the process operating in human sight as described in the Perspectiva. There are explicit references to the Perspectiva. So certain elements are themselves of the natural order, the conjunction of the star, the disposition of the body of the speaker, but others are dependent on the speaker's mental disposition. Words pronounced with a definite intention, firm resolution, strong conviction, in addition to the holiness of the soul, will be more effective, he says in Opus Maius. This thinking is the extension of an idea of Avicenna, which Bacon, in the context of languages, raises to the level of a maxim, that is, nature will sometimes obey the thoughts of the soul, of the sensitive soul in particular, but also of the intellective soul. Avicenna's De Anima 4:4 on the prophetic powers of the soul are also mentioned, including the fascinatio or enchantment. But our doctor seems to draw inspiration from another source as well, that is the Derades of Al-Kindi. I explained that long ago in my book of 94. And there is actually a mention of Al-Kindi somewhere well, I leave that, but it's not that he's not quoted, he's mentioned somewhere, Al-Kindi. So there is the Derades of Al-Kindi is very interesting because we find there the Derades has a long exposition on the functioning of the Virtus Verborum, both for ordinary words and for magical words, which likewise treats of physical and mental conditions, these later being, just as in Bacon, conviction, will, and fides, faith, conviction. Al-Kindi explained the power of words through his conception of universal harmony, excluding what Nicolas Veil-Parot calls destinativity. That is an explanation which relies on the intervention of demons. Kindi's explanation relies on the influence of the star, the disposition of the author, time and place, and so on. And in fact, Kindi was reproved by Giles of Rome in 1270 precisely for claiming unnatural powers for the character. So we see here the importance which should be recognized to the organization of the material testified in the summary of the Opus Tertium 26, when he reintroduces in the section on the Cognitio Linguarum extracts which were originally in his chapter on astrology in Opus Maius Part 4. Bacon is at pains not to conceive of his treatment of the Virtus Verborum as being the same as certain dubious magical practices. This virtus, he claims, does not act in any mechanical way. It rests not only on the will and intention of the speaker, but the inciting effect that words have when they are pronounced. The will cannot be constrained, our author repeats time and again, thus taking issues with the fakes or fake mathematicians who posit a necessity to all these practice. He also blames the theologians of his time who do not understand the difference between magic and philosophical truth. To recognize the power of words, of intention, of desire, confidence is not magic, Bacon claims. And it is interesting to see the development of the argumentation over these issues in the different works which I've mentioned on the handout. Now, I want to add further recent research. First, but I will just mention it, Benoît Grévin has studied has made very interesting studies on the writing systems and on this thing about characters, on this topic of characters. And in particular, he showed the origin of the reflection on the Chinese character, which Bacon got from William of Lodbrok in his journal when he went to China, the Itinerarium. And he found in this analysis of the Chinese character many arguments on the natural power of the caracteres, that is the magical signs. So this you have the articles of Benoît in the handout again. Now the second point on the Virtus Verborum also has been much studied, especially you have all the references in under number 5, especially Béatrice de Laurenti in a book on the Virtus Verborum, and Nicolas Veil also on the Talisman, astrological images, which is very important in that respect, especially for the role of Al-Kindi at the time. So this is something I wanted to mention, and there has been a lot of research on that recently. Now we pass to the third section because I see that the time is running. So the third section of the Opus Maius 3 In fact, it is called a third section because we have it in the summary of the Opus Tertium under chapter 7, but it doesn't correspond to anything in Bridges' edition. The content of this part is given in detail in the summary of the Opus Tertium. He says, and you have that under number 8 on the handout. Bacon said that he's dealing with a part of grammar which does not exist with the Romans and which is extremely useful in the service of research and understanding of its speculative truths in philosophy and theology. It is of importance for the composition of languages, the giving of names, and for the manner in which names signify through their being given and in diverse other ways. Bacon insists greatly on the originality of this third section. He asserts that this science of language was not formulated by the Latins, and above all, that this science has not yet been translated, he says. What might be then this foreign source which could have been given, which could have given Bacon his inspiration? He himself identified the source in a much earlier work, the commentary on Metaphysics 5, written in the early years of his Parisian teaching. There he raises a question which will be in time taken over by the modiste, whether it is in the province of the grammarian or the metaphysician to give names to things, adding that this science of imposition of names is the first science. Scientia quae est impositiva nominum est scientia prima. After asserting, first of all, that the grammarian can only consider names which have been already established, so as to posit the rules behind their formation, he goes on to mention the opinion of others who maintain that there is a science of languages and idioms, and he already adds, we do not possess it. The parallel with the passage in the Opus Tertium is obvious. And here we have the source, that is the Divisione Scientiarum. Here I won't go into details either, but it's a whole bundle of text, which is Alfarabis de Hortu Scientiarum, Alfarabi de Sciencis, Gundisalinus de Sciencis, and Gundisalinus de Divisione Philosophiae. But as a matter of fact, Alfarabi de Hortu Scientiarum mentions that the primary science is the science of language, that is, the giving of names to things, a science which is anterior to grammar, logic, and poetics. So, and Bacon will criticize the traditional presentation of the trivium with the help of these Arabic sources quoted in all the bundle of text I've just mentioned. In fact, this is not the only one to do that. We find that in other introductory treatises, as the Treatise Philosophica Disciplina from the same year, the 1245. So he is fully in his time. And well, so this is something I wanted to add. So as presented in the Opus Tertium, chapter 27, this the first part of the section 3 of the Opus Maius deals with signs and signification. You have that under number 8. And the second part, so the first part is what has been found and recovered by and edited under the name De Signis. I will go back to that. And the second part is the application of this consideration to theology. So the application, that's 3.2. The application of the theory of sign to theology is, you have that under number 9. It is well explained in chapter 27 of the Opus Tertium. And it's also mentioned in the Compendium Studi Theologiae, which, as is well known, Bacon wrote at the end of his life, and which also is an analysis on signs, very close to the De Signis. Now, this topic of the application of science, of the theory of science to theology, is not found either at the end of the De Signis, which is incomplete, or in the Compendium Studi Theologiae. So it's either he didn't do it or it's missing. Now it's possible that it's missing. We don't know. But in any case, the relationship between 3.1 and on science and 3.2 on the utility of the theory of science for theology, of course, is important, especially because in the section, as you see in the summary, he talks about the imposition, the original apposition of names in the Genesis, but also, for instance, the usefulness for the sacraments, the usefulness for the understanding of the relationship between the sensus literalis and sensus allegoricus, which he treats in a number of other passages. So here it could have been something which was a group of reflections on the application of science to theology. So this means that Bacon's ideas on the cognitio languages are not restricted to the analysis of the foreign languages, as he says somewhere. It is much broader, and it includes other considerations also useful for philosophy and theology, as much practical as theoretical. Bacon indeed insists on the originality and importance of the third section of the Opus Maius Part 3. It is a part of the science of grammar which is in the highest degree necessary to theology, philosophy, wisdom in general. He insists also at the end of the section that it belongs to grammar, and on the fact that it is by way of this grammatical mode, grammaticae, that Augustine approached these questions in the second and third books of the Doctrina Christiana. So it's worth noting that this cognitio linguarum, necessaria cognitio linguarum, which Bacon states as the main aim of this section, is the exact wording used to describe his own work in the Doctrina Christiana. I just mentioned that because there was a long argument about Bacon's theory of science, because in the De Signis he doesn't quote explicitly Augustine, but in the Compendium Studi Theologiae he said that, well, he invented a theory of science, and then by chance he found it in Augustine, and of course this is just not right. I mean, I know that Thomas Maloney was in favor of that. I don't know if he's changed his mind, but it's not possible because the Cognitio Linguarum is full of references to the Doctrina Christiana. So we can't see why in the middle of the theory of science, where there are other references to theology and to Augustine, you would just have missed the Doctrina Christiana. So for me, it's something which is just not possible. Now, a few more points, and I've nearly finished. It would be another expose on the technical, more technical aspect dimensions of Roger Bacon on languages. But here, I just want to show the unity of his thinking on language. And I think if you have the chart, if you can look at the chart which I gave you, that the reorganization of the material is really meaningful. And the sections which are which you find in part 1, for instance, and then in the Compendium Studi Philosophiae, the section on the practical and the moral dimension of the study of language, which you find in the moral Philosophia Moralis, in the which was originally Opus Maius 7. Then the reorganization which occurs about what I have called section 2.4, that is the thing about the question of the power of words, the efficiency of the words, which you don't have much in Opus Maius 3 originally, but which you have in the astrology, and then which is reintegrated into the chapter 26, and in other works like the Epistola, and then the section on the last section on science, which it's missing parts. About this section on science, it's interesting because it's found it probably had been cut from the original whole. If we think that the part on the use of the study of science for theology was originally there. And it's interesting because it's found in Oxford Digby 25, which is a very interesting manuscript where you have a lot you have William of Sherwood's in Categoremata, you have other works of the kind, logical works, like for instance a modistic treatise which is composed in England. This is interesting of the influence of the modiste in Paris and so on. So it may have been cut, but in any case it was not originally edited by Bridges. So just a few remarks to end. If we take the more technical treatises which deal with the theory of language, there is clearly a thread which goes from the first works on grammar and logic of the 40s when he was teaching in Paris, or maybe later in England, I don't know, but at least from the early 40s, going to the later De Signis and the Compendium Studii Theologiae. And this thread is the interest on language in use in its intersubjective and pragmatic dimensions, that is involving speaker and hearers and a community. So I will just mention a few points in this respect. And this, it's really what we have dealt with in our long article with Alain de Libera. So first, the Summa Grammatica belongs to the group of speculative university grammarians, which I have called intentionalists, because they analyze grammar congruity, taking into account the intentio proferentis, that is the context. We will find this again in the analysis of signs, where signification is not only referred to the original imposition of name giving, but is seen as a constant process of reimposition, of translatio, and the analysis of linguistics and semantics variation given in the other works confirm philologically this claim, but also the attention given to persuasio, already mentioned, and to the power of words. There is a clear Augustinian background in this theory, explicitly assumed in the Compendium Studii Theologiae. Now, what we can call a pragmatic approach to language, and this is what we showed in our joint article, the pragmatic approach to language seemed to be related to the group of British masters teaching in Paris in the 1240s. And Bacon's dependence on Kilwardby's influential commentary on Prussian has been demonstrated by Onno Knipkens. You've got this under number 11. Onno Knipkens' study is really important. But as a matter of fact, there are other British masters which taught in Paris, and I haven't yet read, I know that Rega Wood was editing a Rufus grammar, which I wish I could read because that would be very interesting. But in any case, and because Rufus was teaching in Paris also, but we have other texts. We have, for instance, John of Garland, and this is interesting because he's a British master a little earlier, and we find the same kind of theory, and he's not a university teacher. So it means that there was something like a pragmatic approach with this British master. And of course, it's found in a lot of sophismata. And here Bacon, there was much discussion about whether Bacon was an outsider or not. Here he's not an outsider, he's fully integrated in the discussion of the late 30s in Paris. Now, this pragmatic approach is also at stake in a lot of, in numerous logical problems which are dealt with in this logical tract. The analysis of equivocity, the role of context, the notion of generatio sermonis, and so on. Now, second point, the analysis of signs given in the De Signis and the Compendium Studii Theologiae is a remarkable construction built on various sources. Augustine, Aristotle's Topics and Analytics, and this I refer to there has been a lot of very numerous bibliography on that subject, but on this topic in particular, I refer to my friend Constantino Marmo's study. but he is also relying on theological source, and this also can give clue to matters related to his biography. I have shown that this his analysis of the sign as being a relational entity related to the utterer and to the thing signified. There is two relations for the sign, one to the utterer, the second to the res significata. It was borrowed from the commentary on Richard Fishaker on the sentences, Dominican Richard Fishaker on the sentences, in Book 4, and to Bonaventure in the context of the analysis of sacramental signs, and also to Richard Rufus of Cornell. Rega just sent me the text, which is very parallel to Bonaventure in this respect. Bacon clearly opposes the theologian views using the same example of the circulus vini, as we will see in a minute. And the opposition is that for him, the relation to the utterer is prior to the relation to the res significata. There is a summary of all this discussion in our recent article, which you have on the handout, the article I wrote with Laurent Cesali, with all the bibliography on the subject. Third point, one of the, what I just want to mention, always linking the doctrinal consideration to the matters of biography, is that it can be useful to go into more details in that, the relation of, I mean, this topic of science, which we find in analyzed in Book 4 of in the commentaries on Book 4 of the sentences, as I've shown in my book of 2004. Third point, on the most vivid debate of the second half one of the most vivid debate in the second half of the 13th century was the one on empty reference, la référence vide, which is the name of Alain de Libera, one of his books, and which he studied in numerous publications. It involved various questions. A, can a word lose its signification? B, can a word signify univocally beings and non-beings? C, does the truth of a proposition imply the existence of what its terms stand or suppose it for? Now, and this also we will find that in our article, this debate is clearly involved in the condemnations in logic and grammar made by Robert Kilwardby on the 18th of March 1277 and renewed by John Peckham in 1284. So this is important to locate Paris. There has been a lot of discussion whether he was in Paris, or Jeremiah Hackett is in favor of Bacon being more in Paris than previously said. And other people think that he was in England. I mean, the only thing I want to say here is that these doctrinal considerations can also help seeing, as I said recently, it probably had a pass for the train between Paris and England, because he was always moving probably from Paris and Oxford, which was quite difficult at the time. But still, it's difficult to say. In any case, the debates which are there in his tract on grammar and on logic are related to the condemnation, which were, and this was very nicely studied by Osman Lurie a long time ago. And of course, as is well known, he's opposing Richard Rufus in this debate. And this also shows that the debates were not on the problem of empty reference, has some consequences for some theological problems, that of the Christ in triduo mortis. What we try to show in our joint article is that the peculiar positions taken by Bacon opposed as much the Oxonian views as the Parisian ones. This debate over empty reference was present in other numerous sophismata edited and studied by a number of scholars, Alain de Libera, but also Andrea Tabaroni, Henk Braakris, Sten Ebbesen, and others. Interestingly, the debate over whether or not a sign, a linguistic word, or any other sign as a circulus vini maintains its meaning when the thing to which it has been imposed no longer exists, was the one on which Bacon opposed in theology the theologian Richard Fishaker and Bonaventure, and Richard Rufus, also violently accused in the Compendium Studi Theologiae. Bacon discusses at length in the De Signis and again in the Compendium Studi Theologiae the debate. And I want to close on something which I found interesting, a text which I find interesting. One of these anonymous, just to see the link that he was known at the time, and he was known in Paris. One interesting sophisma edited on this problem of empty reference, edited by Alain, is very interesting because we find a clear opposition to Bacon's views, expressed in terms as violent as the ones Bacon is known to have used in numerous passages. You have that on the last point of the handout. So it's a question of empty reference, but seen through the example of the Circulus Vini, the question being whether a Circulus Vini, which when there is no wine in the bar, at the moment in Paris, today the bars are reopening, so there will be wine in the bars tonight. So this is a very good moment to talk about that. Anyway, so the problem was whether when you have a Circulus Vini with no wine, whether it loses its signification or not. This is analyzed in the De Signis, paragraph 1, paragraph 147, in the Compendium Studi Theologiae, paragraph 117 and 127. Now, it's interesting because we find in this Anonymous Alani Sophisma, you can read it, something which is very violent. Sic videtur deista positione quod sit similis dementiae et ultra omnes dementia. So we see that this position, that it's close to madness and even over any madness, because not a laik or a cleric or a fool or a wise person wouldn't be moved by the I can't translate Latin into English, so I read the Latin and someone will help with English. Nec sapiens intentum egressus est quin nomine rei praeterite quam cognovit si ipsum odiat moveatur in anima summa. So it would be completely crazy to think that there is nothing happening in the mind if there is nothing corresponding to the sign. And that's what he says after. He says that a name doesn't signify that a thing is, but only a thing. So even if there is no wine in the cellar, the sign signifies the thing. So it's interesting here to see the violence, and there are other arguments in this, particularly in this Sophisma edited by Alain, which are clearly referred to the De Signis. So just a few words of conclusion. What connects perhaps the Summa Grammatica with the 3 section of the 3rd part of the Opus Maius is his vision of Bacon's vision of language apprehended in its concrete functioning, situated in time and space, always being seen in its intersubjective dimension, whether it is a question of the reader, interpreter before the text, sacred or profane, of the author, of the priest before the faithful, or the preacher about to persuade the unfaithful. In this matter, the Augustinian heritage, especially that of the De Doctrina Christiana, is always present. This conception of language is assuredly in conformity with his ideal of a sapienza, which aims not only at speculation, but much more at action, and we have seen that with the Philosophia Moralis, a sapientia which touches not only the intellect, but also the feelings, and which has as its goal the perfection of man as a whole. All the elements which together give speech its value and effectiveness are viewed in the context of a hierarchy which begins with grammar, culminates goes on from grammar to logic and rhetoric, culminates with rhetoric, music, and poetry. The analysis begins with the simplest constitutive physical elements, letters, signs, sentence, proceeds to the description of the various arguments, dialectic and rhetorical, and culminates with integration of the different parameters, which what one might call enunciatives, intonation, gesture, mental disposition of the speaker and his underlying intention, the state of the word, and the disposition of the heavens. And this, I think, is a thread throughout Bacon's analysis of language. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irène. It's been splendid to listen to this fantastic talk. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. I would suggest we could use the chat because we are a lot of us, actually 33. Otherwise, it's going to be quite difficult to keep trace of who's going to ask what. So we can use the chat. I suppose you know how to use it. You have a button just at the bottom of the screen. You press it, chat. 1 for a question, 2 for a follow-up, and we can start.
So I have to leave soon, but I had a question. So in the past, people have raised doubts about Bacon's actual knowledge of Greek and Hebrew, and I wonder whether you share those doubts.
No, I think this can. We have already had all the text, and now that's why the study made by Anaheim, Grebin, and Morard is so important, because here you see a scholar at work, and there has been more than that. Judith, for instance, she studied the context of the production of the Hebrew grammar, the treatise on Greek alphabet, on Hebrew alphabet. I mean, there was knowledge on that at the time, and so he was completely inserted in this circle of around Grosseteste, and there were other scholars, so he was not the only one. And this was really related to the milieu of the Correctorium Bibliae, where language were known. It's interesting because, of course, it was not known at all. It was not taught at the university. Other authors say that it should be taught, but it was not taught, but it was known. These languages were known in the context of the Correctorium Bibliae. Gilbert Dahan has written a lot on this, and I think I put the references. So he definitely, about Arabic, it's a bit more tricky to say, and we don't have as much on Arabic as we have on Greek and Hebrew, and this is obvious because Greek and Hebrew were useful for the Bible much more than Arabic. There is, well, we can discuss that.
Do you think there's any change, so between the early Bacon and the later Bacon in terms of knowledge of languages?
Yeah, it's good question. I really think he learned it a bit late. I mean, in the Summa Grammatica, there is no trace of knowledge of Greek. All the Greek, or simile Greek, he gets it from Frisian. So he probably didn't know Greek at the time. He knew it. He learned it later. He learned it maybe. I read all the articles by Yael, by Hackett, by Jeremiah, by a lot of people on biography, and we still don't know exactly when he went back to England after 47, whether he was in England or not. Really, this matters of Amanda Power has written a lot on that. I was trying to make a biography, a very short biography from the study of history, and it's difficult. So we don't know exactly when he learned it, but what was sure is that in the milieu of the Franciscan Correctoria, they knew Greek, and there was a real philological interest in the study of languages, and that's where, around Grosseteste, for instance, and that's where he learned all this. Probably not in Paris, it was not well known. In the early 40s when he was first teaching there.
Many thanks. I'm sorry, I have to run now. Goodbye and thanks.
Bye.
If I may, I have a follow-up regarding this, because the question of Arabic, it's, as you can imagine, I mean, it's quite interesting to me, because of course, if we look at least 2 or 3 generations before Bacon, you have many people from Britain going to Spain, from Robert of Chester to Daniel of Morley and Michael Scott, of course, with interest and knowledge of Arabic that in some case we should think or suppose that was already there before moving to Spain. Because, I mean, of course, they were very often collaborating with people, Mozárabes, or people, I mean, who knew Arabic directly. Yet it seems that, I mean, this interest regarding Arabic just fades away, not only with Bacon. So my first question is regarding this. So how Bacon relates with Arabic? Why is not interested when very often is referring to Arabic Islamic authors from Avicenna to Al-Farabi? And the second question is, isn't that maybe we can find in circles of translators that there, I mean, when they went back in Britain, some remnants of this knowledge of Arabic?
But I must say that recently I have tried to catch up with the bibliography. I've read a lot about Hebrew in particular, but I don't know what has been published recently on that. So I really have to look more for that, and probably we can share our information on that. What is true that, so I have a very old knowledge, if I can say so. So I've not really, I couldn't answer, and maybe probably other people know much better than me. What is interesting is that he's, in relation to Arabic, is that he mentioned it many times, that he's known Hermann, the German, and his difficulty in translating the poetics, and why he didn't do it, and so on. So this is interesting. And he doesn't seem to have gone back to the text which was of interest to him. So maybe he couldn't do it. I don't know. I really don't know. I have written a little on that, but it's an old bibliography. So we need to catch up with that. It would be interesting to see if maybe other, for instance, for the study of Hebrew, the studies are by Judith Oslovi are really new, I mean, recent, and they have changed a lot what was little known or not as well known. So maybe we have more on Arabic, and I'm going to inquire, because I know that some people in Paris working on Aristotle's rhetoric and so on. So they may know more about that. So it's an important topic. It's an important, and of course we know that for Bacon it's important, because knowledge, there is a kind of translatio linguarum which follows the translatio studiorum. So, but still, the milieu of the Correctorium Bibliae was his milieu. But maybe he was also in the milieu of the translator, and that's why he criticizes them so much. I don't know. So it's something really I would love to know more about that.
Thank you. Timothy, you had a question. I mean, you want to ask the question orally.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the lecturer. It was wonderful. I really appreciated the time that you spent and the explanation, and also the bibliography and the close textual analysis. My question comes from my area of research. It's easy for me in Franciscan studies to trace an interest in language all the way back to Francis of Assisi himself, who was very particularly focused on writing his own texts and his own use of language. And as I follow that through, up through people like Bonaventure and Bacon, I'm curious if there are studies that have to do with the reception of Bacon's thoughts on languages in the subsequent centuries. And I ask this because currently I'm involved in studies of Franciscans in the New World and their use of indigenous languages. and there has some very interesting prologues, for example, by Francisco Pareja, who was here in Florida in the 15th and 1600s, who talks about the importance of language and preaching, and it reads like it's right from Bacon. I mean, you can draw a direct line, but I'm wondering what happens in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. Do scholars pick up and quote Bacon? Like I said, I can draw a line easily just by comparing text, but I'm very interested if there was actually a systematic reception of Bacon's thought on language. Thank you very much.
Well, again, it's a program of research we are elaborating in this with the New Society. In fact, I couldn't tell you. I know that Bacon is quoted in the list of priors, as Amanda Power has shown when she tried to criticize the view of Bacon's being condemned, which she doesn't think is right. But I really don't know. I think Benoit Grévin is the one to ask this question, because he's been learning the study of languages in the 14th century. It's very difficult it's difficult. I don't have the answer. I haven't read on that, but maybe haven't looked for it. But what is interesting in his views on language is more technical views, which in fact I'm more familiar with this part of his thought. These views on language are known. I mean, they are influential. For instance, it has been shown on Duns Scotus, for instance, theory of science, but also in Peter John Olivi. And there has been some research on that topic recently, not only on the theory of species, but also on language. For instance, I found a passage where in Olivi's Questiones Logicales, which is a clear reference to Bacon, although he doesn't agree with him. So there is a lot there, but on the I think the thread to be followed probably, but again I don't know. The thread to be followed would be to see to read all what has been written about the Correctorium Bibliae, because there is probably something which connects the different Correctoria, William of Lamar. For instance, the grammar, the Liber Triglossos is connected with these notes on Bacon I was mentioning. So there is a tradition up to the 14th century. I don't know. I don't know, but it's something I would like to know more about that. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions?
And thank you so much for your lecture, some lecture. Let me come back to the question to the relation between Roger Bacon and Arabs, especially the relation between Bacon and Al-Kindi, because in your presentation, the relation between the performative function of the language and the astrological background of this construction of the meaning of the language maybe is inspired by the radis of Al-Kindi. Maybe if there was a relation between the radis and Roger Bacon, maybe between Oxford and Paris you have other region in the middle, this Iberian region, and maybe Toledo, because Roger Bacon used to quote Logica Al-Ghazalis, maybe in the Gundi Salinas version, and other Arabic sources.
So, what's your point? Yeah, agree on what.
The relation between Al-Kindi or the radis and your presentation of the different levels of language, not just the performative, the astrological, and this aspect of the power of the words.
Yeah, I'm fully convinced that he took from Al-Kindi. In my book of '94, I translated the Opus Tertium, this section on the. Let me close the window because it's too noisy. I translated this section on the power of words, and if you read the Epistola, I mean, it's so close. It's so close to the Derradis, for instance, this idea that there is a right time to talk, and you have to have an intention and a desire and a fides and so on. And this is very well known at the time, and he's completely influenced by the. I mean, he's really taking over from the Derradis, which was also quoted in another field, which is the field of the incantation, which were studied by Béatrice de Laurenti and Aurélien Robert in particular. But it was something which was known at the time, so he was not the only one. What I find fascinating, and of course, this was a very tricky problem at the time, because there was a condemnation on determinism. And if you see, I did that in my book, but if you follow the arguments on the power of words from one work to the other, to the next, you can see that he's more careful in stressing that there is no determinism in that, is that the soul cannot be constrained. It can be incited, it's an incitative, it can be pushed into doing something, but you have free will and so on. So he's very careful. And this also, for people who know the debate, may be connected, because we are in the same years of the condemnation of the 1270s, of the condemnation of the 1277. So maybe if someone knowing the debate more than I do could really relate it to the discussion on the condemnation, because it's something very tricky. And you can see that more and more Bacon is very careful to distinguish. In the Astrologia, in probably the first draft, the Opus Maius 4, he's very enthusiastic about all these things. And then he's more careful. You know that it's very dangerous to talk about these things, that it's natural, that it shouldn't be confused with the magical power of words, with this Vetula using all these incantations, the characters and so on, and there is free will. And so he's very careful. So he's really in the middle of this debate. And so this is interesting. Now the other Arabic sources, of course, are very influential. We've shown that in the commentary of the Signis. Logica Gazellis is very well known, and it's used in a number of issues. And but it doesn't deal with this problem. It's for other aspects. But for the power of words, I'm sure that all this debate is very. That's what really what I wanted to show you, that the reorganization of the material of this section 2.4 is meaningful, even for matters of chronology, for matters of doctrine, for matters of integration in the debates and difficulties of the time. And sure, the Derradis is important. There is a very good, I mean, all the section, this deals with another topic, much discussed topic of Roger Bacon and magic. But on imagines, caracteres, and so on, there are a lot in Nicolas Veiparot's works, a big work on astrological images, on this debate about images and so on. Well.
Thank you.
Other questions, either with the chat, or you can just ask your question without writing in the chat. Otherwise, I have another question, but I'm sorry. It's again on Gundisalinus and Alfarabi, because you were referring to that passage from the Ortu Scientiarum, in which a language is positioned with a primary role regarding the division of knowledge and especially the tribune. So I was just wondering, is it Bacon the only one in using that passage from the Ortu Scientiarum, or was, a commonplace or maybe a tradition of approaches?
No, it's very well known. I mean, everybody uses it. I quoted Claude Lafleur has studied these introductory treatises like the Philosophica Disciplina, in this introduction to philosophical course, and they are always quoted. And there is a very good article. I will find it. I should have put it on the handout in the volume on Albert the Great. It was a volume edited by Julie Bramberg, and that there is an article by Mondozio which showed that it was very important, very influential. All these. Now I'm a bit mixed up and tired, so I won't. But the four treatises are important, and they're using in different respects. But they are used also by Albert the Great. And a lot of what we find in Bacon about the Arabic authors are also, even though he criticizes Albert as one of these, but he criticizes everyone. But Albert, in Albert the Great, the analysis of logic is also very, very related to these treatises. I mean, they knew from Gundi Salinus, Al-Farabi's translation and so on, the Arabic. It's not a trivium, it's a kind of a fourth trivium in four parts, like with a grammar, logic, poetic and rhetoric. They knew it from Gundi Salinus before knowing the text themselves. So they knew it from the end of the 12th century. So it was very influential. But what is added here is the science of the imposition of names. And this is very clearly, it is stated in the metaphysics, so it's stated in an earlier text that it's that's where it gets this idea of having a new science of the imposition of name. And it's interesting because the designis exactly correspond to this science, this treatise, except that he uses the Arabic source, but to do that, he relies on Augustine, on science. So it's always the Arabic with Augustine. It makes a kind of big, I mean, he's really building something completely original with sources which are available to him as to others. And in a way, especially in the works of the late 60s, when he's no longer in the university, he's much more free than he was when he was in the university. The Sumuli Dialectiques are much more integrated in the curricula at the time, the logic of the supposition, it follows Aristotle's treatises and so on. In the Designis and the Compendium, he talks about these texts, but he's doing something very, very new and drawing on theological sources, Arabic sources, Augustine, Farabi, and making his own theory, which is very coherent and very interesting.
Thank you. And Claudia, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. I just a question about the pragmatic view on signification and on language in England. If there is some reason why we can find a pragmatic approach to language in England, because, for example, it seems that in a text that can be attributed to Richard Rufus of Cornwall, there we can find a sort of theory of imposition of words similar to the theory of Bacon, different in some way, but there is a theory of reimposition. So my question is, what is the reason why we can find a pragmatic approach, and if we can find that?
What text were you referring to, Claudia?
It's a text. It's a question on the anima, and the text is Questiones on the Anima. Is in Praga, in the bibliothèque in Prague, and attributed to Adam de Whitby and Ali. And there are some texts that can be attributed to Richard Rufus of Cornwall.
But this is very interesting. But it confirms the British dimension of this approach. Of course, when we talk about a British group of British approach, it's of the British masters being in Paris. As a matter of fact, we started a correspondence with Rega Wood recently. Probably don't know enough about Richard Rufus, but she said that he was probably teaching in Paris before Roger Bacon, and in between both there was Richard Kilwardby. That's what she says, but it's really something we're much discussing. And I don't know enough about Richard Rufus, what he was discussing. So what you're saying is confirming that. What is sure is that this pragmatic, why it comes from England, I don't know. It's just, I don't really don't know. It's just found around this British master, and it's Kilwardby was very known in this respect, especially for his theory of figurative construction, which is taken over in Bacon Summa Grammatica. But there are other sophismata. There are also anonymous collections of sophismata. What I found interesting is the link with John of Galen, because this was not very well known. And Elsa Marga, who she wrote a dissertation with me a few years ago, and in fact, in the Ars Lectoriae, there are exactly the same theological sophismata as in Roger Bacon's Summa. And I found that fascinating because it's a very practical, it's not a university theoretical treatise and so on. But you find all the things, you remember at the end of the Summa Grammatica, you've got all these theological sophismata, which are analyzed by Bacon. And in fact, you find exactly the same. And you find another thing, which is the analysis of interjection. And it's very interesting because interjection is kind of emotive part of language. And this, of course, it's in many texts of Bacon, and it's other tracts, anonymous, tracts related to Kilwardby and so on. Now, when I'm talking about a pragmatic approach in the 40s, it's really a hypothesis, and it's what we worked on with Alain in this for this study I was mentioning, is that we find that also in logic, and it's very related. So it's not only in grammar, but it's also in logic. The idea of generatio sermonis, the analysis of equivocity, some technical problem which involve the role of speaker and hearer. But what is for sure, and this I've written on that many times, is that this pragmatic approach is then integrated in Paris. I mean, it becomes important, and it's refuted by the modistes. In the 60s, 70s, they're really opposing this pragmatic approach. This idea that the congruity of a sentence can depend on the context, situation, and so on. For them, it's not possible. Martin of Dacia opposes that, Gentilis also. So the Italian modists like Gentilis, studied by Costantino, they oppose this view. So there was, and then in the late modist, again, you had this coming back. So there was something happening with the French master, people taking these views, not taking, opposing. But I find this with a group of British, I mean, we need to have more studies, more editions. And this I really need to read the Rufus grammar, which I haven't done because it's not yet published. And I know you're working on that also, so I'm interested by any material. I think we should share all the material.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Roberto.
I have already posed my question. I would like Irène to come back to. Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Can you hear me? Could you come back to this influence Bacon experienced after joining the Franciscan order? So, of course, as far as his approach to language is concerned.
You know more.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
You're the historian more than me. No, but I have the impression that it was when he joined, but really the impression, I don't know much about that. I read, no, it's true. I read that in others. It's not something I studied personally. I read that about that, especially in this study by Grévin Morat. It's very interesting because people, that's why I wish people who have worked on the Compendium Studi Philosophiae would really take this into account, because it's a major text. I think it's really fascinating to see if their hypothesis is right. It's wonderful, and it looks, I mean, it's a wonderful study. There's no reason to doubt it. what is interesting is you can see that when he entered the Franciscan, they began to study the Bible, and he started working on Greek etymology, Greek on the translation of the Bible, and so on and so forth. Also, and this goes back to José's question not José, someone who talked about the translation on Arabic, maybe Nicola. Maybe he also worked with on Arabic on the translation, because translation of philosophical texts, but for the translation of the Bible, he worked in the milieu of the Correctoria, and there were people, as I said at the beginning, there were obviously people who knew Arabic, who knew Greek, who knew Hebrew, and they were correcting all this. I mean, it's a tremendous work when you see all some of his analyses are not correct, but sometimes they are really correct. And there was the lexicographers. He was using this Britometricus. There were other people working. And so when he entered in the Franciscan, he was probably in contact with this Correctoria. But he was in contact. We know that he met William of Mara, who was younger than him. And so he started integrating these views in his general conception of language. I said, maybe I push a little, and so I will go a step backward after your question. If you see the Summa Grammatica or the Summules Dialectices or the Summa de Sophismatibus, we don't have all this interest on foreign languages and so on and so forth. These are really texts of the Faculty of Arts dealing with Latin, with grammar from Priscian, with logic from Aristotle, with imposition theory and so on. We don't have this interest. But what I say is that what I found interesting is that in the Summa Grammatica or in the logic, where he's interested in this intersubjective approach, the idea of language and act, of course, it could be developed further, for instance, in the Moralis Philosophia, in the practical dimension, but you don't find that in the early text. So maybe this is, I was stressing the general thread across his different the different periods where when he wrote about language, but it's for sure that there was something which changed drastically. Now, I don't know about his moral philosophy, actually. I don't know about if it can be found in earlier texts, in all the treatises on commentaries on philosophies which were written earlier. Maybe we could find that. I don't know. This I haven't studied, so maybe some people know about this. But surely for his study of language, he was linked to the Franciscan milieu. On the other hand, there is another thread which is interesting, which is the one which is more connected to the theologian. As I said, the theory of sign which you have in the De Signis, in fact, borrows from Richard Fishaker, who was a Dominican in England, an Augustinian Dominican. He was not. Then you have the teaching of Rufus, and this also with exchanging ideas with Rega at the moment. But there was the teaching of Rufus in Oxford, probably, and then in Paris. And here again, Jeremiah Hackett and other people don't agree on whether he was in Paris or in Oxford and so on. But in any case, this is another point of contact with a theologian. And I don't know if it can be related to the Franciscan or not. What is for sure is that for the things I have studied, because everything has to be put together, his analysis of signs, which you find everywhere in commentaries on sentences on Book 4, you find that also in Kilwerby, but also in Bonaventure. And everyone has this chapter, it's in Peter Lombard, everyone is commented, the division of signs, which is in the De Signis, you find that in the text. So it's you can see that he's opposing Bonaventure views. And so this was probably also the Franciscan milieu in Paris. And as I said, there were references to Olivier. So there is, again, a Franciscan link, which is different maybe from the one I was mentioning before about the Correctoria Bibliae. But this, and this, I think it's very interesting. It would be interesting to share the kind of knowledge we can have from the doctrinal point of view, treatises, which is the things I'm more familiar with the data which are collected by the historian and which are wonderfully explained, especially in Amanda Power's book. On Bacon and Olivier, there has been also some work by Yael and Dominique Demanche showing the relation between Bacon and Olivier. So there was something there. There was something there, sure.
So there is
Thank you.
Follow-up.
Thank you.
Timothy, and then Constantino. If you want to write down your questions, do so, but then you will have to ask them out loud anyway. So Timothy.
I want to draw attention to the broader Franciscan culture that Bacon entered into, and also point out the dynamics within the Franciscan order with regards to language. Some years ago, I edited a book for Brill on Franciscan preaching, and the introduction that I wrote is called The Franciscan Fascination with the Word.
Oh,
and
I missed that, sorry.
No, that I just wanted to point out that you can trace in the early Franciscan culture a broad, not only love of the word, which is grounded in theology. I mean, even Bacon himself in the Opus Tertium says the greatest or the ultimate word is the revelation of God. So all words that come to us, as Bonaventure would talk about, also are representatives of God, which is ultimately a theological grounding. But there's a really fascinating material culture that goes along with this, and Italian scholars have been great at pointing out how the Franciscans themselves, as opposed to the Dominicans, actually became, in the 13th century, deeply involved in the material production of books. And one of those places was in Assisi. And scholars have pointed out that this was much different than among the Dominicans. And one Italian scholar went as far as to say that the Franciscans had a religion of the book, that they were so focused not only on the words of preaching and teaching, but also writing and making books. And this goes all the way into the Reformation, where, forgive me for quoting this little quip, but one of the criticisms of the friars was, when the friars come to town, watch out, protect your daughters and protect your books. So there is a deep, deep culture here that Bacon, I think, would have found incredibly welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I look forward to know more about that from your book. Thank you.
Santino?
Yeah, I have a short question, more curiosity than a question. At the end of a passage on the handout, the number 10 of the Compendium Studi Theologiae, he says, Bacon says that it's important if one looks into the sacraments and alia signa sacri textus, you will find that the second modus signi naturalis is particularly important, which means refers to the images. Is there anything else on the sacraments and images? Because I find this quite might be a problem here, because usually sacraments are considered conventional signs, while images are natural signs. So is there anything about that?
Alors, I think about, yeah, you're right, I haven't thought about that. About images, it could be interesting to see again in Nicolas Veiparot's book on astrological images, because he's got a lot about that. And it's a whole debate on the efficiency of images, which it's true that I saw more the debate on the part of efficiency than of the sign as being as a natural sign. But again, I was thinking about this passage about the, you know, the tropologique, l'analyse tropologique, the way in which the Old Testament is sign of the New Testament, all this relationship, which is a relation of sign, which I don't know if it would be natural sign. In fact, I didn't do that, but preparing, I was trying to relate all the passages, which, I mean, it's immense, the number of pages he wrote about that. And in fact, I haven't finished that, but what is interesting is that if you go through his work, and now we have the PDF, which is very different from what we had when we wrote in the 90s, to look for the passages in which he talk about sensus literalis and sensus allegoricus, whether it's what kind of sign relation is it? It is. Is it allegorical? Is it a natural? Because he always talk about that. In general, from what I remember, is just said that if you don't understand the litera, you can't reach the allegorical text. It's not very technical, but maybe there is more in this. About the sacrament, again, he doesn't, when he talks about the sacraments, he doesn't talk about the sacraments as signs in other passages, but maybe have missed some. He talks only about the way, always his business about intention is that a priest, they repeat the words and they repeat the sacraments, they're just like parrots, not knowing what they say because they don't know the meaning, and so again, always relating the meaning with the efficacy. When I mean the words of the consecration and so on, and this could be, makes me think, I'm not sure at all, it could be also something to be investigated. But the question about whether signification is something important for the efficiency was much discussed. It was discussed by Peter of Auvergne, for instance. It was discussed in the De Radis. It was discussed in other respects. So there was something about signification here. And but you're right that in all this discussion, I can't remember. In the chapters on the sacrament, they discuss about sacrament being in the same time conventional signs and natural signs, like the water, which naturally signifies purification, so it's a natural sign, but it's also imposed to be the sign for the sacrament, so it's both. But I don't know. It's something to be remembered. I think you're right. Interesting question.
So I think we can have maybe one last question, and I just want to remind you that we can continue this discussion also next week during the second meeting of the reading group, which will be dedicated again to language and the compendiums to the philosophy. So in case, if there are many other questions, or Irène, I don't know if you're planning to join us next week or not, in case that could be a very good venue for the discussions on these topics. But if anyone has one last question, I think we can have the time. Otherwise,
I really think that we should share the material in any language. I mean, I've been reading so much. I must say, I hadn't read about biography for a long time, and I've seen the wonderful recent edition, and there's a lot of new material. But we should share, because what has just been said on the Franciscan, the studies in the Franciscans, the historians, what we have been, I say, people working in the field of language and semiotics and logic have been doing. All this is so related in Bacon that we can't just stay in our field. We really have to cooperate, otherwise we will miss something. And I'm very glad of the discussion, which raised a lot of problems in different fields. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very glad.
Thank you, Irène. I mean, it's again, just without. Yeah, I don't know if Jerry had a question. I just wrote it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, wait.
My question was the issue of Augustine's condemnation of a
Yeah, something because you had both microphones on, so I tried to just have one, but both disappeared. I'm sorry, Jerry. My fault.
Jerry, we haven't seen him, and now we can't hear him. It's a real problem of language here, of communication.
Now you can see me.
Ah, voilà.
We can hear you, Jerry. You ask your question. Yes.
My question was simply, to me, the big issue for Bacon is how to reconcile signs and images in astrology with Augustine's condemnation of astrology.
Yes, I mean, he's very, I think it's not, he goes completely in that direction. And what he says in the Designis about the conventional, the imposition, is completely against these false magicians. He's trying to, I think you're right. I mean, Augustine is helping him, moving away from the magician, or claiming, trying to prove, I mean, he's really helping him, proving that he's not a magician, that he's using the science in a natural way. And this goes very well with his analysis of science in the Designis or Compendium Studi Theologiae. It's very relevant, very coherent. I think it goes in the same direction. Ah, voilà, Jeremiah. Here we can see you at the end.
At the end.
It's nice, at least last image. No, I think it's very coherent because, as we know, Augustine is very against all these false magicians and so on. And so he wants to use these tricks, and he doesn't want them to be condemned, and he wants to say that he uses them in a natural way, and in this way he can use the Derades, which goes also in the direct. I mean, the real problem, and this the historian of magic have really shown that, the condemnation of these images, characters, and so on is what Nicolas calls the destinativity. If they are addressed to demons, then they're wrong. And so people want to show that they are not natural and they are addressed to demons because it's a way they can be condemned. And that's why Giles of Rome goes against the idea that they are natural signs and against Alchemy. He says you can't say that they are natural because saying that they are natural, there wouldn't be any problem. But he said, no, they are not natural. They are necessarily addressed to demons, so they should be condemned. And this is interesting. It goes, I think it's we can find obvious link with that. It's interesting.
Thank you again, Irène, and thank you all. Just one last thing. So next week, we're going to meet on Friday at 4:30, Berlin time, 3:30 London time, and 10:30, I suppose, in Colombia and New York.
That's right.
Yeah. And so if many of you already have joined the reading group, if anyone wants to join, just drop us a line at the email address of the society. And that's it. Thank you again, Irène. It's been splendid. I will upload the video to YouTube and then send you the meeting. Thank you again.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you.